Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to another edition of Wildcard MTG. I'm back with another deck tech, and this time for Final Fantasy. I chose a commander from the main set, and I chose this one because I really enjoyed Final Fantasy 16. I got sucked into that game so much when it came out. I know it was kind of divisive, whatever. I loved it. I loved the characters. I loved the story. I loved everything about it. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, dang, you must have built Clive. Wrong. We are looking at Joshua Phoenix's dominant for this one. And I built this deck in a kind of reanimator, modular artifacts kind of build. And after I got the deck together, I kind of realized people built this deck similarly to Jolly Balloon Man. I didn't build Jolly Balloon Man, had no idea. But we're not going to be making tokens copies, but unlike Jolly Balloon Man, we're not going to be making token copies of these creatures. No. We're going to be filling up our graveyard to reanimate them and get a ton of modular triggers off all these creatures. I actually modeled this deck a lot after my Osgear, the Reconstructor deck, because it has a lot of the same things with like modular creatures and everything like that. But I took it in a little bit different direction than the way I built that deck. And I think this thing will be pretty fun to build. You know, we're relying on Joshua's back half of the commander, and then also other Sun Titan and kind of get stuff back from the graveyard, abilities and creatures and cards. So without further ado, let's look at our commander. Joshua Phoenix Dominant is a 1 red-white legendary creature, human, noble wizard. When Joshua enters, discard up to 2 cards, then draw that many cards. And for 3 red, white, and tap, you can exile Joshua and then return to the battlefield transformed under its owner's control. And unfortunately, this line of text, activate only as a sorcery. If it was instant speed, oh boy, we could do some pretty cool stuff. And on the front side, he is a 3/4. And then when you flip him over, he becomes Phoenix, Warden of Fire. And as this saga enters, and after your draw step, add a lore counter. And for the first 2, he has Rising Flames, which does 2 damage to each opponent. And then the way that I built around this deck is the final part of the saga, Flames of Rebirth. Return any number of target creature cards with total mana value 6 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield, exile Phoenix, then return to the battlefield, front face up. It is a flying lifelink 4/4. So the way that I built this deck obviously was around that last ability, and I built it with artifact creatures that use the modular ability and to be able to reanimate them with Joshua or other cards in the deck. We're going to utilize a lot of discard ability of either Joshua or cards like Thrill of Possibility. And then we're going to do that to fill our graveyard. And we also have other spells that will let us discard, let us draw. And when the time is right, reanimate those creatures while making other ones bigger and bigger with the modular triggers from each of those artifact creatures dying. So before we get into anything else, what is modular? So if you look at the rules on the screen here from the MTG Wiki, modular represents both a static ability and a triggered ability. Modular means this permanent enters with N+1/+1 counters on it. When this permanent is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you may put a +1/+1 counter on target artifact creature for each +1/+1 counter on this permanent. If a creature has multiple instances of modular, each one works separately. We don't have to worry about that second part. And now the rules part about modular. If a creature with modular gets enough -1/-1 counters, or like a -X/-X ability, to make its toughness 0, or to cause the damage to be lethal, the modular ability will still give another artifact creature the +1/+1 counters equal to the number the modular creature had before it got the -1/-1 counters. For the enters the battlefield ability, the number of counters the permanent gets is equal to the number that follows the word modular on the card. For the leaves the battlefield ability, the number of +1/+1 counters on the permanent at the time it left the battlefield is what's relevant. The number after modular doesn't matter. So if it came in with 2 1/1 counters and it's a 2/2 and it left up with 5 1/1 counters, then 5 of those 1/1 counters are going to go on another creature, artifact creature specifically. When a creature with modular dies, you may put a +1/+1 counter equal to the number it had onto a single target artifact creature. You can't split them up among 2 or more artifact creatures or put less than the number of counters it had when it died unless you choose not to use the ability. So with that, let's look at some creatures we were running that have modular. And I just want to note, change some things up with this. It's not going to be every single creature in the deck. I've kind of sorted them into little sections of creatures just for brevity's sake, and really the more important cards in the deck. Obviously, the full deck list will be in the comments if I don't forget, because I always forget. And then somebody comments, where's the deck list? Sorry about that, guys. So first up, the first creature we're going to look at here is Arcbound Crusher. Arcbound Crusher is a 4 generic mana artifact creature juggernaut with trample. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Crusher, and it is a modular 1. So it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it. When it's put into a graveyard, you put its +1/+1 counters on target artifact creature. So it's a 4 mana 1/1. But the upside on this, because we're going to be casting a lot of artifacts and creatures, it will get a +1/+1 counter every time we do that, and it has trample, so that's good evasion. And the next one we're going to look at here is Arcbound Overseer. It is an 8 mana artifact creature golem. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature with modular you control. So that's also really huge, because if you have a bunch of modular creatures out, they're going to get bigger. And then this thing is modular 6, so it comes in with 6 +1/+1 counters. 8 mana 6/6, not bad, and then it puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature with modular. I mean, come on. Definitely really good in this deck. And the next one here is Arcbound Shikari. It is a 1 red-white artifact creature cat soldier. It has first strike. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each other artifact creature you control. So this one doesn't really necessarily care about modular, just cares about artifact creatures, which is still good. And this one has modular 2, so it comes a 2/2. But the fact that it enters and puts all those counters on all your other creatures is why it's in this deck and why it had to be mentioned. And the next one here is Arcbound Slith. It's a 2 mana generic mana artifact creature Slith. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, put a +1/+1 counter on it, and it has modular 1. Now, I know it doesn't seem like much getting a 2 mana 1/1, but if you were able to get in for some damage on this and then get more counters on it, it could get big. You know, it could also get counters from your other modular creatures, and also it plays into our commander, where it's another one of those things where it could come back from the graveyard because it's only 2 mana if we decide to do so. And the one everybody probably knows that, well, had to be in this list is Arcbound Ravager. It's 2 generic mana for an artifact creature beast. Sacrifice an artifact, put a +1/+1 counter on Arcbound Ravager, and it has modular 1, so it's a 2 mana 1/1, but it is a sacrifice outlet. So if we have other modular creatures on the battlefield, this is a good way to have a way to sacrifice them to make the other ones bigger, or this bigger, or our other one that has trample bigger, you know? We have a few kind of sacrifice outlets, but this is the main one that I would rely on in the deck, mostly because we can get it back with our commander if he flips over. And we have Arcbound Reclaimer, 4 generic mana for an artifact creature golem. This one lets you remove a +1/+1 counter from Arcbound Reclaimer to put target artifact card from your graveyard on top of your library, and it's modular 2. So this one, you can remove both those counters, Arcbound card or another modular card that you want to get back, put it back on top of your deck, draw it next turn, play it, who knows. And again, the only downside is because you're removing those +1/+1 counters from this, when it dies, nothing is going to get the +1/+1 counters from it because it doesn't have any on it. So that's the only downside with this, but it's graveyard recursion, so that's part of why it is in this deck as well. And finally, a card that's going to be a huge help in this deck is Zabaz the Glimmer Wasp. It is 1 generic mana for a legendary artifact creature insect with modular 1. And it says if a modular triggered ability would put 1 or more +1/+1 counters on a creature, put that many +1/+1 counters instead. So it puts an extra counter for us, which is great. It is sort of a sacrifice outlet in that you can destroy one of your own artifacts. So if you want to get that modular trigger, you can destroy something of your own. And then also giving it flying gives it some sort of evasion if you want to put those counters onto Zabaz and then attack with it. And like I said, giving it that extra ability of getting the extra +1/+1 counter is great. Definitely want to utilize that. Okay, so that's some modular creatures. Let's look at some protection creatures that we're running in this deck, because we have some creatures we need to protect just in case there's board wipes or removal. And the first one here is Alseeds of Life's Bounty. It is a 1 white enchantment creature nymph with lifelink, and it's a 1/1, and it has pay 1, sacrifice Alseed of Life's Bounty. Target creature or enchantment you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. So not only can we get this back with our commander if we flip him over, but it also protects our commander. You know, one thing that we're going to have trouble with in this deck that I'll get to later is if Joshua gets removed at any point in time during the resolution of him transforming or of him getting to that third trigger, we're screwed. So this is a good way to protect him if somebody's using targeted removal on him. You could just give him protection from that color, because on one side is a creature, on the other side he's an enchantment and a creature, so double whammy. Good little protection card. We have ways to get this back as well, so don't even worry about it. Alright, next up is Paladin Dance Steel Maverick, 2 generic 1 white for legendary artifact creature Synth Knight. It's a 3/3 with vigilance and lifelink. You can exile Paladin Dance Steel Maverick. Each creature you control that's an artifact or human gains indestructible until end of turn. So that's why this is in the deck, to protect Joshua, because he's a human. And also just in case somebody's doing a board wipe that's hitting artifacts, we can give our artifacts indestructible if we don't want them to die just yet. Or if, because if they wipe the whole board, none of those modular triggers are going to go off, and we're not going to get the +1/+1 counters to put on anything. So really important to keep this for a board wipe. And of course, Bronze Guardian, 4 generic 1 white for artifact creature golem. It's a star 5 with double strike and ward 2, and then other artifacts you control have ward 2, and its power is equal to the number of artifacts we control. So again, this is more built-in protection, more so for our artifact creatures and our arcbound creatures and the modular creatures. Not going to do much for Joshua, unfortunately, but for targeted removal that people are going to wipe artifacts, this is good to protect them. Yeah, it's a little costly at 5 mana, but we could also get it back with Joshua if we really need to. Alright, in this next section of the creatures is sacrifice, proliferate, and kind of non-artifact creatures, because we do have to have some non-artifact creatures to enable what we're trying to do with this deck. And the first off is Metastatic Evangel. It's 1 generic 1 white for a creature Phyrexian human cleric. It's a 3/1. Whenever another non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, proliferate. So we do want to be proliferating a little bit. So there's a couple cards in here that do that. The fact that we are going to be getting creatures that will enter and leave the battlefield, we should be able to proliferate quite a bit, so it'll be good for those modular triggers. And then we have Envoy of the Ancestors, 2 generic 1 white for a creature human cleric. It is a 2/3, and it's Outlast. Pay 1 white, tap it, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature. Outlast only as a sorcery. Modified creatures you control have lifelink. Equipment, auras you control, and counters are modifications. So this gives all of our modular creatures lifelink, which is good. We want to kind of be able to stabilize if we are getting attacked a lot, or if we're trying to block. Having lifelink on those creatures is good. So that's why I included it in this deck. And next up we have a new card from the Final Fantasy set as well. Alice Levalier, 2 generic 1 white for a legendary creature elf wizard. She is a 3/2. We are not going to worry about the partner, so who cares about that? And she has first strike, but the part that we care about the most is the second part, the dual cast. The second spell you cast each turn costs 2 generic less to cast. So a lot of these modular creatures and artifact creatures are pretty high cost. So getting to get a discount of 2 generic mana on some of these cards is going to help us way more than you realize. And the cool thing is she's 3 mana, so if she gets killed, we need to bring her back. Joshua can get her back once he pops his Phoenix. So again, I didn't run a lot of cost reduction artifacts in this deck because of this card. I know it's if you draw it, you're lucky. If not, well, you're kind of stuck paying the cost. I get that part of it, but I really do like that reduction on the second spell, because more than likely we're going to be casting one spell and then we're going to need to cast something else. So this is really good for that, and it's a new card, and she's got first strike, and it works with Joshua if we need to get her back. Again, that's why I include it in the deck. And you all know him, you love him. It's Felden of the Third Path, 1 generic, 2 red for a legendary creature human artificer. He is a 2/3. You can pay 3 mana, tap him, create a token that's a copy of target creature in your graveyard, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. It gains haste, sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. This is a really important way to keep getting those modular creatures out of our graveyard. Let's say we got like that 8 mana one in there. Well, now all we got to do is pay 3 mana, make a token copy of it. It's going to get all those modular, enters the battlefield counters on it. When it gets sacrificed at the end of turn, all those counters are going to go on something else. You could do a lot of little shenanigans with that, like back and forth with this card. So had to put Felden in this deck. There's some bonus cards that I'm going to talk about at the end that do similar things to Felden that are really good if you want to kind of switch up some creatures and stuff in the deck, but we'll get to those later. And the next one up here is Archetype of Aggression, 1 generic, 2 red for an enchantment creature, human warrior. It's a 3/2. Creatures you control have trample. Creatures your opponents control lose trample and can't have or gain trample. The reason this is in this deck is to give some sort of evasion to these creatures when they get really big, because there's not really a lot of ways to give them trample or stuff to get over with the damage, because we do want to play this deck very aggro. We want to be attacking as much as possible. Yes, it's an enchantment creature, so a lot of the arc-bound stuff isn't really going to work for this creature, but it's also 3 mana, so if we need to get it back with Joshua once he does his Phoenix thing, that is why it's in the deck. You'll notice the mana value, I've kept it around 2 or 3 mana value for each card, just to kind of like get the most value out of his Phoenix ability. And making your opponent's creatures lose trample is also pretty darn good, I would say. So that is why this is in there. And next up we have Oswald Fiddlebender. It's 1 generic, 1 white for a legendary creature, Gnome Artificer. It is a 2/2. He has Magical Tinkering. You pay 1 white, tap him, sacrifice an artifact, search your library for an artifact card with mana value equal to 1 plus the sacrifice artifact's mana value, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Activate it only as sorcery. You're going to be looking for an artifact you want to get on the battlefield, but you also get to sacrifice an artifact. So if you want to sacrifice one of your modular creatures to make another one bigger, and then get a different modular creature out, that is exactly what he is for. It's really good for this. Again, he's kind of a sacrifice outlet as well for only 1 mana, but it's sorcery speed, but it's still good because you can tutor and sacrifice. Not a bad way to go. And of course, we had to put a Sun Titan in the deck because that's kind of what Joshua's ability is a little bit. It's a Sun Titan effect, sort of. You all know Sun Titan, 4 generic, 2 white for a creature giant. It's a 6/6 with vigilance. Whenever it enters or attacks, you can return target permanent card with mana value 3 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. There are quite a bit of modular creatures that are mana value 3 or less. There's a ton of creatures that I mentioned earlier that are mana value 3 or less because Joshua cares about that, Sun Titan cares about that, so I kind of kept it in that realm, and it's like a doubling up effect to kind of keep stuff in your graveyard if it goes there to get it back out. And of course, another new Final Fantasy card, Summon Ixion, 2 generic, 1 white, and it has on the first chapter, Arrow Spark, exile target creature and opponent controls until this saga leaves the battlefield. So It removes something off the board for at least 3 turns if you aren't attacking with this creature, which is fine. I think that's good enough. Get something off the board for at least a couple turns. The next 2 parts are the ones we care about more, though, because the next 2 chapters are put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures, and then you gain 2 life. So it's getting counters on those modular creatures. It's gaining us some life in an incidental way, which is also great. And then this thing itself is a 3/3 first striker, so it could be a good blocker if anything. And it's also 3 mana, so we could get it back with Sun Titan. We can get it back with Joshua. There are multiple ways to get this out of our graveyard. So those are some of the creatures in the deck. In total, we're running 36 creatures, but let's look at the instants and sorceries now. We are running some Faithless Looting kind of cards, and yes, Faithless Looting as well, in this deck to keep our hand and graveyard filled with creatures. There's also a suite of protection cards and graveyard recursion. So this first section that I'm going to look at here is our discard and card draw section. We are running Faithless Looting, Faithless Salvaging. They both basically do the same thing. It's where you draw 2 cards, then discard 2 cards. Whereas Faithless Salvaging is discard a card and then draw a card, but it has rebound, so you're going to get to do the thing again for free the next turn, whereas Faithless Looting has flashback. And then finally, we are running another new card from the Final Fantasy set, and that is Laughing Mad. It's 2 generic, 1 red for an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card, and then draw 2 cards, and then it also has flashback. So had to put it in this deck because it goes with that draw and discard kind of stuff that we're trying to do with this deck. It's very similar to Faithless Looting. It just costs 2 more mana on both parts of it, so a little underrate, but it is at instant speed, so that's kind of the upside. Same effect basically. And then we have Reckless Handling. I really like this card. It was from March of the Machines Aftermath, and it's a 1 generic, 1 red sorcery. Search your library for an artifact card, reveal it, put it into your hand, shuffle, then discard a card at random. If an artifact card was discarded this way, it deals 2 damage to each opponent. So, number 1, it's a tutor, which is good, I think. I like running tutors, but you have the quote-unquote downside effect of maybe discarding it at random, which for our deck doesn't really matter. We want to fill up the bin anyways, so if we discard it, so what? And even better, if it's a artifact that got discarded, all our opponents are going to take 2 damage, so it technically deals 2 damage to each opponent, which is nice too. Pretty good little uncommon, I don't think that people really recognize this card too much because that set kind of came and went, but I put this in a lot of my artifact decks, and I really like running it. So I think it's great for this because we want to draw cards, we want to find certain artifacts, and it's fine if we discard it. And now we're going to talk about some graveyard recursion. We're running Trash for Treasure. It's a 2 generic, 1 red sorcery. It's an additional cost to cast this spell, sack an artifact, and then return an artifact from your graveyard to the battlefield. So again, that gives us a little bit of sacrifice outlet if we want to get rid of a modular creature, and then if we want to bring a bigger one back or a different one back, boom, comes right back to the battlefield. A little trade-off there, if you will. And then we are running Wake the Past. It's a 5 generic red-white sorcery. Return all artifact cards from your graveyard to the battlefield. They gain haste. So this can be a game ender if we play it at the right time. So something I'll get into a little bit later when we go into the kind of how to pilot the deck. But obviously, if your bin is full of artifacts or all your creatures are in there, or you've been discarding a bunch of them, I mean, this is gonna get someone killed at least right away because of the fact that they have haste. And then guess what? If a few die along the way, you're gonna get modular triggers off that from them dying. So you'll just have bigger boys the next time around. So that's a good way. This is a good way to get stuff back out of our graveyard. And then we were running Reconstruct History, 2 generic red-white for sorcery. Return up to 1 target artifact card, 1 target enchantment card, 1 target instant card, and 1 target sorcery card. We don't have planeswalkers, so we don't got to worry about that. from your graveyard to your hand and then exile this. Again, this is another kind of like underrated card that I really like, especially if you're filling up your graveyard with a bunch of stuff, or you've already played a few instants and sorceries and you're like, dang, I wish I had that Faithless Salvaging back, or Trash or Treasure back, or whatever. And this lets you get all of those things back in your hand. If you want a modular creature back, or like somebody, let's say, blew up our Soul Ring and we want it back, we can get it all back. We got some really good enchantments in this deck too. If they get blown up, one of them is our MVP. So this card is great to get stuff out of our bin back into our hands to replay them. And next up, we're running Protection. This is like a protection and removal suite of cards. I'm not running a ton of removal in this deck, like just straight up. Not even like there's a couple pieces of targeted removal and like a board wipe, and that's it. And I know that sounds bad, but again, it's kind of like my play style, just very glass cannony. And I modeled this deck a little bit after my Osgear deck, and that deck runs like no removal, and it's because the graveyard stuff that we're going to be doing is so resilient. It really doesn't matter if our stuff is getting removed, and if we have ways to get rid of other people's stuff, that's fine. It's not going to make too much of a difference. So we're running Boros Charm, Duty Beyond Death, Damning Verdict, Unwanted Remake, Dispatch, and Requisition Raid. The two that I want to touch on real quick, one of them is a new card from the Tarkir set that just came out, Duty Beyond Death. It's 1 generic, 1 white for an instant. As an additional cost to cast a spell, sacrifice a creature. Creatures you control gain indestructible until end of turn. Put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This is at instant speed, and it's 2 mana. Yeah, you gotta sacrifice a creature, but guess what you're most likely gonna sacrifice? A modular creature, so that way you can get that effect to put a whole bunch of counters on something. It's going to be indestructible, and then you're going to get to put more +1/+1 counters on everything else on your board. I got blown the heck out by this card on a game on Arena, and I was like, wow, that card's really cool. What could I put it in? And then I immediately, as I was working on this deck, put it in here, and it makes so much sense to do. So that's like one of our protection pieces and a way to buff our board bigger and bigger. I also wanted to touch on Requisition Raid. It's a 1 white mana sorcery, but it has Spree. So you choose 1 or more additional cost. And the other 2 are removal. So it's destroy target artifact, destroy target enchantment, which is good. 3 mana, remove 2 things. That's great. Yeah, it's sorcery speed, but whatever. I don't really care about that. And then finally, the third one, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature target player controls. So if you want to dump 4 mana into this, get rid of 2 things on the board, and then buff all your stuff, great. That is a great card, I think, especially for a uncommon. Pretty cool card here. It, like I said, pretty light on removal, but this one being removal and a buff for your team, I really enjoy this card. It's worth 4 mana if you can pull it off. Even if you only need to like remove 1 thing, that's fine too. It's fine. So that's all the protection removal stuff. Don't really need to go too much more in depth on that. So let's look at a couple important artifacts in this list. One of the bigger ones and kind of a more expensive card in the deck is the Ashnod's Altar. It's 3 generic mana for an artifact. It says sacrifice a creature, add 2 colorless mana. So again, this is one of our other sacrifice outlets, and it nets us mana so we can cast more of our modular creatures if we need to. I kind of didn't want to put it in this deck, but I needed just like 1 more outlet, and I figured this would be a good one. And next up here we have Energy Chamber. It's 2 generic for an artifact. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, choose 1. Put a +1/+1 counter on target artifact creature, or put a charge counter on target non-creature artifact. We don't really care about the second part. We want to be putting those +1/+1 counters on target artifact creature we control, so it's a good way to make our modular creatures way, way bigger. And this next one's kind of a weird one, but it'll make sense. It's Lux Artillery. It's 4 generic mana for an artifact. This is whenever you cast an artifact creature spell, it gains Sunburst. You're probably asking, what is Sunburst? Well, it says here in the reminder text, it enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter on it for each color of mana spent to cast it. So yes, we are only a Boros deck, a red-white deck, But if we're playing a creature that is generic mana cost and we pump a couple colors into it to cast it, and it's a modular creature, it's going to enter with two extra +1/+1 counters on it. That's huge. That is so huge. And then the next part, which I've never been able to pull this off, but it is possible. It says at the beginning of your end step, if there are 30 or more counters among artifacts and creatures you control, Lux Artillery deals 10 damage to each opponent. So if you can pull that off and you get up to those 30 counters, you're going to be dealing 30 damage across the board, which is insane. It's kind of an underrated card, I think, especially with like the +1/+1 counter thing, and getting 2 extra counters for 4 mana isn't terrible. And the rate seems decent, and then in the off chance that, your board doesn't get dealt with and you can do 10 damage to each player, why not? And finally, one of our last sacrifice outlets here, we have Throne of Geth. It's 2 generic mana for an artifact. It says tap it, sacrifice an artifact, and proliferate. So again, we want to be putting more counters on stuff. This is also a sacrifice outlet, so it's a double whammy. We're going to be getting more counters and sacrificing something. Can't go wrong with that. And finally here, let's look at the enchantments. So the main one right off the bat that we're running is Fable of the Mirror Breaker. The main reason we're running this is for the back side of it. Obviously the front side for looting purposes and to get an extra body on the field for the 2/2 Goblin Shaman. But on the back of it, pay 1, create a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control except it has haste. Sacrifice it at the beginning of the next end step. So we can get one of our modular artifact creatures, make a copy of it, sack it at the end step, get all those counters on another modular creature. Really good card in this deck. Yeah, it's a little pricey at about $8, but works really, really well with what we're trying to do. And then we have Pia's Revolution, which is 2 generic 1 red for an enchantment. Whenever a non-token artifact is put into your graveyard from the battlefield, return it to your hand. Unless target opponent has Pia's Revolution, deal 3 damage to him or her. So I've played this card a lot in a lot of artifact decks, and at first your opponents are not going to let you get those artifacts back. But then once that damage starts piling up and they're taking 3 and then 3 more and then 3 more, and they're like, ah, man, I can't afford to take 3 more damage unless you're going against a life gain deck or whatever. But that's why it's target opponent, so you can pick the person with the lowest life who's more than likely just going to let you get that artifact right back to your hand, cast it again, get some more modular triggers, boom. And then also this can be brought back with the Sun Titan. And then next up is our MVP of the deck. This card is kind of like a no-brainer. It is a newer card from Tarkir Dragonstorm, and that is Smile at Death. It's 3 generic, 2 white for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, return up to 2 target creature cards with power 2 or less from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on each of those creatures. So because when our modular creatures are in our graveyard, they are seen as 0/0 creatures. They don't get the counters until they're on the battlefield. So this lets us get back our 2 highest cost things, or the things that will enter with the most counters, and then on top of that they're going to enter with 2 additional counters on them, which is great because that means more counters to put on our other modular creatures. And this card's still pretty cheap. It's about $2. I think it should be, honestly, depending on what kind of deck you run it in, it's probably should be more than that. I mean, this thing's kind of nuts. I should honestly put this in my Nithroy deck because it kind of runs the same thing. It's a bunch of 0/0 creatures in the yard, but when you bring them back to the battlefield, they hit and get like 6, 7 counters on them or whatever. And man, I might actually put this in the deck now that I'm thinking about it, because this card's pretty rad with that. Obviously, if you're running like smaller creatures, humans decks and things like that, it would be good in there too. But for this deck specifically, it's like the MVP, man. You got to get those 0/0s back onto the battlefield. And then finally, we're running Together Forever, and that's mainly just to get extra counters on things. I thought it would be a good addition to the deck because getting to return a creature that has counters on it back to your hand, when it dies, you will get to recast it. You'll still get the modular trigger off of it because it's dying. That's the important part. It's the dies trigger that it cares about. So it'll die, you'll get the trigger, it'll go back to your hand, you'll get to do it again. And then this thing also puts a couple counters on creatures, so had to put it in the deck for that reason. And then finally, I'm not going to go too in-depth with the lands. The mana base is 37 lands. It'll be up on the screen here. We're running all the artifact lands you could possibly run, all the Urzatron lands, because, I mean, why not? Most of our creatures are all colorless lands. One real quick land I want to shout out is Drannith Ruins. It taps for a colorless, but you can pay 2 to put 2 +1/+1 counters on target non-human creature that entered the battlefield this turn. So really great with those modular creatures that are going to be entering with counters. Everything else is just pretty generic, low, lots of basic lands. Don't need to go too crazy with the mana base in this deck. So that is everything in the deck. For this next section, before we get into kind of like how to pilot the deck, let's look at some test hands and kind of see what we should look out for when we're playing this deck and what our hand should look like when we're going to draw them. So first up on the screen here, you can see we have 4 lands in hand, a 1-drop, and 2 2-drops. That is great. That is an excellent rate. All those creatures do something. The good thing is we could play the Arcbound Worker on turn 1, play the Metastatic Evangel on turn 2, then Thrill of Possibility on turn 3, and then bam, we will get a way to like discard some cards if we don't need to land, draw a couple cards, and then hopefully have another creature so that way we can use the Proliferate trigger off the Metastatic Evangel. But 4 lands, that's a great start. Alright, the next one up here on the screen, you can see we only have 3 lands, but one is an Urzatron land, which is great. We still have stuff we can play on curve, as you can see. Nothing until 2, but that's fine. We got the Steel Overseer, the Arcbound Prototype, and the Alice Levalier. So the cool thing about that, so what we could do with this hand is we could play the Arcbound Prototype first, then we could play Alice, and then on the next turn, when we have 4 mana, we could play Demand Answers, pitch whatever we don't need, and then possibly play the Steel Overseer for completely free, which would free up our hand for whatever else we have drawn off the Demand Answers. So that's a little way to look at the tempo of what we should play in the order to play it in. And that's if we draw a land too, because we would need 4 mana by the time that comes around. And then finally, another hand here. This one is a bit of an iffy keep, because if you look at it, we only have 2 lands and an Arcane Signet. And then the other 2 cards in our hand are very high cost cards. Looking at 7 and 5 mana, and neither of them do anything right now at all. So this is a hand I would mulligan and put back. It's just not good enough. It doesn't have enough lands. Yes, we could hope to draw into a 3rd land and keep the Arcane Signet and still play the Iron Apprentice, but I don't know. That's a little iffy for me. I mean, you could keep it also because of the Steel Overseer, work your way up, but again, basically until turn 5, Alibu is a dead card, and Wake the Past is basically useless unless somebody just starts wiping out our artifacts right off the bat, but I wouldn't count on that so much. So not a good hand to keep. This is a mulligan for sure. So that's just a couple hands to kind of look at there and get the idea of what's going on, what you want to draw, what you want to look out for, those kinds of things. So now let's get into how to pilot the deck. So the main way you really want to pilot this deck is playing fairly aggro. We're running a high number of creatures, and as long as we have at least 1 on the battlefield, it doesn't matter if any die or get sacrificed, as we have multiple ways to bring them back anyways. Now the modular ability on these creatures allows us a lot of freedom to pick and choose which artifact creature we will put the counters on. You know, there's at least 3 that have some sort of evasion that can help with building them up to be pretty huge threats. When we do have a big threat lined up, do not be afraid to attack other players with it. The best way, I would say, to attack or figure out who you want to attack is if you have 2 or more modular creatures on the battlefield. If one dies, then you make another one bigger with all its counters. So it's totally fine. You could keep that one back, attack with the other one on purpose. Maybe you do a trade-off with a block, or, you know, somebody kills it as you're attacking with it. That's totally fine. Now, our commander is the biggest way we get value from our graveyard. The total effect cost is our commander at 1 red-white, so 3 mana value total, and then 3 red-white to activate. So 5 mana total. And then, so that's 8 mana total right there. Then when he hits the Saga side, he has to survive 2 more turns to get the value. So turn 7 at the earliest, if everything goes smooth, if he, if nobody messes with him, that is the earliest you're going to be able to do that. Because, chances are he'll probably get caught up in a board wipe or with targeted removal at some point. So then you got to play him again, and he's just going to cost more mana. But the earlier you can activate him, the better. That's why I would honestly wait to even cast Joshua until you are getting close to that 5 mana activation and your yard is pretty full. That's just me. That's a tempo play. You can cast him earlier if you want that automatic, draw, discard kind of thing going on. Now, if he gets removed at any of those points, you lose a ton of tempo in the deck. So if he gets removed right when you're activating it, if he gets removed before the 3rd chapter of the saga hits, that is the biggest one. And it's because Joshua is not an artifact as well, so most of the protection we have won't save him. Mostly we have the Alseed of Life's Bounty. That's the closest thing that might. So tons of downside in that area because of how slow and susceptible to removal he is, but also tons of value if he is able to get that trigger off on this Saga side. So keep that in mind when playing the deck. Joshua is a late cast commander. You really don't want to cast him as soon as you're able. Maybe give it a turn or two, get some more threats on the board, and then when you feel like you're ready to try and get that Saga to pop off, then cast him. Because the other downside is it's sorcery speed, so if someone were to remove him, you cannot respond at instant speed, which is so dumb. This card could have been so much better if they did not do that. It's my only thing that really irks me about this deck. But despite that, the deck is pretty resilient to a lot of things. Yeah, there's not a ton of removal in this deck, but that's fine because we're going to be playing a more aggro style anyways. Yes, graveyard shenanigans will kind of screw us if somebody gets rid of our graveyard. A lot of artifact removal is also going to hurt us, but also not really at the same time because we have so many ways to get those artifacts back. So all in all, it could be fragile, it could be pretty powerful, it just depends on what you draw. But that's any deck, I guess, really, when you think about it. And like I mentioned earlier, we have our MVP card, Smile at Death, that works so incredibly well with our modular creatures. That is the card to look out for in this deck. We're not running any tutors to kind of get that kind of stuff, so getting it every game won't be possible. But man, I tell you, a game that you do get that thing out, and you're able to get creatures back, 2 creatures back every turn, it's going to be crazy. That's really how you want to play this deck. It's a very artifact-heavy deck, a very aggro deck. It's Boros flavored, but kind of not in a way. It's not equipment themed, let's just put it that way. But like I mentioned earlier, I did kind of build this deck based around my Osgir deck, and then I found out later this is how people, I guess, supposedly built the Jolly Balloon Man at one point. So it's not entirely an original idea, but I thought it would be fun with Joshua, the way he kind of gets that trigger of getting creatures back and the way we want to be sacrificing and everything. So I thought it was a cool way to build it. I changed my stuff up a little bit from what other people were doing. I don't even know if people are building this commander, but if you would like to hear some upgrades, we're going to do 5 cards that you could put in this deck that would make it go way crazier. So just hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoy these deck techs. I'm going to try and do one more on Final Fantasy and then get ready for whatever's coming next, because people are way too fast at getting these things out. It takes me forever. But regardless of that, let's look at 5 upgrades. So the first one here, as I mentioned earlier, is Osgir the Reconstructor. That is how I built this deck originally. This is not the exact list that I built. It's way different, but it still does have modular creatures in it. But Osgir is kind of insane the way he lets you make token copies of those artifacts. So he's a 2 generic red-white giant artificer with vigilance, and he has pay 1, sacrifice an artifact, target creature you control gets +2/+0 until end of turn. And then X, tap and exile an artifact card with mana value X from your graveyard. Create 2 tokens that are copies of the exiled card. Activate only as sorcery. So this can get pretty crazy and pretty out of control if you're making tons of copies of those modular creatures. which is why I kind of see why people did Jolly Balloon Man that way, because he's a little cheaper. But you get tinier versions of those creatures, so I don't know. I think Osgir's better in my opinion, but that's just me. And so I figured he would be a good addition. You can swap him out for like the Overseer or something like that. You know, try and keep as many artifacts as you can in this deck. That's the main thing. And then next up we have Canoptic Spider. It's an artifact creature spider for 5 generic mana. It's a 4/4 flyer, and it says whenever another non-token artifact creature or vehicle enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So this would be another bit of card draw that you could put in the deck, because we are going to be having a lot of artifact creatures enter the battlefield. And if we have a big one where like we reanimate our whole graveyard or something like that, I mean, it's going to draw you a bunch of cards right off the bat. It's a little more expensive. It's $7, you know. It's not too budget breaking, but the deck is already like pushing $100, so I was trying to keep it under $100. And then of course the Ozolith. How can you make a Counters Matters deck without the Ozolith? But man, this thing's pushing $35, and I just so happen to be lucky enough to have like 3 copies, because I bought a lot of Ikoria when I first got back into Magic, and so I've been sitting on those things for like ever. And yeah, I mean, it's a good card. You know, if you have one laying around, definitely swap it out with something else. I don't know, probably Ashnod's Altar I would swap it out with, maybe. That's just my recommendation. And then we have an enchantment. All will be 1, 3 generic, 2 red for an enchantment. Whenever you put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, all will be 1 deals that much damage to target opponent, creature an opponent controls, or planeswalker an opponent controls. So because all these modular creatures are entering with counters, obviously this is good, because then you're going to be hitting opponents for damage each time you put counters on those creatures. And then finally, a land. This one, you know, you can take it or leave it. I think this is a good land. I only have like 1 copy of this myself, but it is a $10 land. It's Inventor's Fair. At the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 3 or more artifacts, gain 1 life. So already pretty good incidental life gain. And then it has 4 tap, sacrifice Inventor's Fair, search your library for an artifact, reveal it, put it in your hand, then shuffle. Activate this ability only if you control 3 or more artifacts. So it is a tutor on a land, and a very good one at that. So it's a take it or leave it if you want that kind of tutor effect. If you don't, I'm sure there's something else you could find to put in the deck. But those are 5 cards I would add to kind of push this thing above and beyond, and probably about $150 after adding all these cards and swapping out. So a little on the pricey side, but not too bad. So that is the deck tech for Joshua Phoenix's Dominant. Thank you so much for checking it out. I've been Wildcard MTG, and we will see you on the next one.